Welcome to our Digital Health Workshop webinar. This webinar is supported by the Florida State University and University of Florida Clinical and Translational Science Award. We are part of the Translational Workforce Development Series, and this is supported by an NIH-funded grant. Today we'll be talking about virtual trials and give an introduction to social media recruitment and participant engagement. My name is Kate Muessig. I am a professor in the College of Nursing and the founding co-director of the Institute on Digital Health and Innovation. Our mission is to advance individual and public health through collaborative and synergistic partnerships where we're focused on the development, evaluation, and dissemination of digital health tools, technologies, and innovations. And I'm joined today for this presentation by my colleague, Judah Dean, who I will ask to introduce himself now.
And I'm Judah Dean. I'm the Research Communications Manager with IDHI, and I've been working with Kate and our team for a little over 8 years now. So excited to be here today to talk more about social media recruitment.
We have 3 learning objectives for today's talk. We'll start with a review of key concepts and strengths of virtual digital health research trials. Judah will talk about some considerations and approaches for social media recruitment, and then we'll end with an introduction to participant engagement strategies for increasing retention and enrollment in clinical trials. So the expansion of virtual trials really took off during and after the COVID-19 epidemic. But our group has been doing either fully virtual or hybrid trials for quite some time, including before COVID. This is because they really have reduced a lot of the barriers to participation in research that many of our study populations face, including geographic and transportation barriers. And through that, they help enhance the diversity of enrollment into your trials. They're really a patient-centered approach, which can increase the accessibility of research and offer the potential for scaling up studies more broadly. And they can, if done correctly, save time and resources during their implementation. There have been a number of advances that have supported the expansion and really the quality of virtual trials. These include things like remote patient monitoring, where digital tools are being used to track patient health and behaviors, and this has really helped improve both the data quality as well as engagement and retention. There's now a variety of different methods for administering digital informed consent, which can make recruitment easier and more efficient. And there are just a wide and increasing range of decentralized tools for data collection, which again can improve both the quality and integrity of your data as well as the completeness of the data. There are a number of differences between traditional in-person trials and virtual clinical trials, and you can think about these at each stage across the research process, or each component of the research process, from recruitment through consent, data collection, retention, monitoring, and thinking about the burden of the research on participants, who has access to your research, as well as implications for cost and timeline. In a true complete virtual trial, every step of the research process can be done virtually or remotely, from recruitment through to analysis. And at each step, there might be varying levels of human engagement or automation. The aspects of virtual trials that we'll be focused on today are really at the recruitment and the engagement and retention stages. And at this point, I will turn it over to Judah to talk about recruitment.
All right, so let's dive into recruitment. So there are a range of options for social media strategy. Some campaigns will let you run ads for as little as $5 a day that you can start and stop whenever you need, or some have higher minimum spends, like dating apps that can have requirements in the hundreds to the thousands. So always consider your recruitment strategies when drafting your budget and consider your budget when choosing a recruitment strategy. Many of those spaces, like Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, Peachjar, which is a virtual bulletin board for parents that's managed by school districts, those sorts of platforms will let you create a business account and run what they call self-service ads. That means you can set up the campaigns yourself, you upload your imagery, tailor your audience targeting, choose your budget, and let the campaign run. And just a side note that right now TikTok is not allowed at FSU, but I'm expecting or hoping that to change soon with a shift to US ownership, so that may become an option available. Other options include partnering with influencers. Those rates are usually more expensive than a quote unquote traditional campaign. We're in the early stages of contract development for influencers, but we've occasionally run ads through podcasts to still leverage an influencer's audience in that way. Um, Something we've also done in the past is contract with celebrities through Cameo, which is a service where celebrities make personalized videos. Cameo for Business lets you write a script that they'll use, and then you can run the video as an ad through Meta or whichever platform you want to use for about 2 weeks. And you can pay more to extend that license. However, with AI advancements, we've heard from young people that these types of videos may feel less credible. They just don't know whether they're real and trustworthy. So take that with a grain of salt these days, but it may still be worth a try. Um, then, of course, there are no-cost campaigns like emailing listservs, newsletters, posting in closed Facebook groups or Discord channels, Reddit threads, or even direct messaging community organizations and clinics to ask them to share a flyer or a post with their networks too. So, how do you design engaging recruitment materials that will perform well on social media? It's important to grab your audience's attention through a hook and compelling imagery, whether that's high quality stock imagery or leveraging viral trends like memes. Consider user-friendly design platforms like Canva that have lots of templates that you can customize. FSU has a enterprise account with Canva, so we all have access to premium content. A handful of examples of our team's ads, which are tailored for a youth and young adult audience, are on this slide as examples. And one pro tip, video ads often perform better than static image ads, but you don't have to be a videographer. In Canva, you can turn a static image ad into a video ad just by animating text or using a gradient background that's animated. So there are some quick hacks for creating some video content. For ads, less is more. Do not cram absolutely everything about your study into a social media ad. I think this can be, particularly challenging for those of us who love context. We want to be sure people are informed before they click on an ad, but we have to find a balance to share just enough information that most folks who click on the ad could be eligible without sharing so much information that their eyes glaze over and they just scroll right past the ad, or sharing so much that it lets people know enough about the criteria to provide fraudulent responses in order to be eligible. Um, just keep in mind, your screener will have much more information before they consent for the study. So think of the ad as a hook, not the full scoop. And remember that the ads also have a caption where you can share more. So the image or the video itself doesn't have to be text heavy. Something I see a lot when consulting in this area, uh, researchers will include eligibility criteria like age and location in the text. But when running a paid campaign, we can tailor who sees the ad. So it's only shown to a certain age range or only shown to a certain location. So you may want to get language IRB approved that includes those factors for other materials like printed flyers, but we can skip that in social media ads. And usually I just make a note in the language document that we send to the IRB to explain that we may omit that kind of language depending on the ad targeting options. Remember to speak plainly. Translate your medical jargon into terms that someone at about a sixth grade reading level will easily understand. And of course, it is crucial to ask for feedback from your target audience. What resonates with you as a researcher might not land well with the population you need to reach. If you have a community advisory board, ask them to send some examples of ads that resonate with them. Um, Ask for specific feedback, hearing why someone likes or doesn't like an image or language or font, whatever it is critical to design. I don't like that doesn't give me concrete information that I can carry forward into other designs. Tell me what and why. What would you do differently? What imagery would you like to see instead? That type of direction will guide your updates. Or even better, pay folks in the community that you're trying to reach to design the ads and write some of the language. Community engagement in the development process will save you time and money so that you run ads that land with the population you need to enroll. So, key guiding principles here are clarity about the research, building trust with the community, and cultural tailoring to be sure that the content resonates. Positivity matters. Think about the tone of your ads. We may be researching very serious topics like infectious diseases or depression and anxiety, but the ads don't have to mirror that gravity. What are the positive pieces of the study that you can highlight as a benefit that the IRB will be on board with you using? Are you offering peer support or patient navigation or free medication? And share the impact about participation in your research. That impact is a benefit. A hook could be your voice matters, make an impact on public health. So one real life example that has stuck with me over time was an ad header for a study that did not perform well. So the hook was living with HIV and feeling so alone. And this was accompanied by an image of, a sad young person alone. Um, Compared that with what the study was offering, which is peer support for people living with HIV, and imagery of happy young people together, which had much more success. I wish I still had the example imagery to show you, but you get the idea. The positivity makes a big difference. So, what do you need to submit to the IRB? Requirements vary depending on who your IRB is. When our team was at a different university, they let us use very broad language that we were sharing some examples of what stock imagery would look like, that they would all come from the sources included, but we didn't have to show them every ad. One of our big projects right now uses an external IRB, and they require approval of every single ad. No changes to font size, colors, anything without approval. But generally, you'll submit a document with all of the recruitment language that you'd like to use, headers, captions, any longer text. You'll include examples of imagery. Maybe it's templates, maybe it's the ads themselves. It probably just depends on the size of your study. Also include the licensing information for imagery, whether that's through Adobe Stock, Canva, other free sources. And then I also include a lot of context for the IRB reviewers. So I mentioned earlier explaining to the IRB that we might skip naming criteria like age or location in an ad because of ad targeting. And you may also want to explain that short headers, the quote unquote hooks, are always paired with longer captions within the ad that provide more information about the studies, that identify the ad as a study, that kind of thing. And then I usually include a screenshot of an ad as it will be shown to the user so that the reviewer can see an example of the imagery and the header and the shorter language paired with a longer caption like what you see on the right. So hopefully the reviewer will not have any questions. When you are creating materials for IRB submission, keep in mind that you will need different ad layouts for different platforms. and even certain placements within the same platform. So, like how Instagram has different formats for posts compared to Reels. Um, Research the formats available for the platforms that you plan to use. The most common are 9 by 16 format for stories and Reels, square layout, and Instagram feed is now 4 by 5. Um, Also, be sure to research the restrictions of each platform to make sure that what you submit to the IRB will actually be usable on the social media platforms you choose. Most platforms have some sort of limitation, like character limits or what sort of language can be used. You might not be able to advertise prescription medication or use certain language around substances. It just depends on the platform's rules. Um, a big one that Meta always eventually flags is get paid. They are totally fine with you saying get up to X dollars to participate in a research study, but specifically that get paid language automatically gets flagged as a discriminatory job posting. Um, and then remember when you're designing ads to leave space at the top and the bottom of the ad. Platforms usually include a profile icon and some sort of call to action button that are overlaid on your ad. So you can Google the recommendations for spacing for the platforms that you plan to use. You can see one example of those overlay zones on the right. It is often a big chunk of space, so make sure you take a look before you create them. Speaking of placements, so you might be wondering, where will your ad show up? So if you're using a platform like Meta, you can let Meta decide automatically, or you can manually choose which placements are used. You can advertise on both Facebook and Instagram, just one, just certain placements in both, whatever you want. Um, Options include the newsfeed, stories, reels, Facebook Marketplace, Instagram Explore, sidebars, even third-party apps. So this picture is how Meta shows you what your ads will look like in different placements. You can see at the top the ads could be shown, and you can see how different sizes are needed for something like an Instagram story compared to the Facebook feed. All right, let's talk budget. Budget for social media advertising when applying for project funding. Write a substantial amount into your budget if you can. Overestimate if possible. Social media evolves rapidly, and I certainly have not seen it get any cheaper to advertise on, no matter the platform. So, like I mentioned earlier, cost varies. Meta can be as little as $5 a day. A dating app like Jacked might require a minimum of 2 to 3 ad flights in a city, and those ad flights only last 3 days, but cost anywhere from $500 to $1,500 or even $7,000 nationwide. Um, so the smaller your overall audience, or the more personal or sensitive your study feels, the harder it will be to reach your audience through a quote unquote traditional social media campaign. It will cost more. So I've run ads for a couple studies recently that focus on substance use. And while there is traction, it's pricier, not just because it's a relatively small audience, but also because there isn't a human connection for someone to feel comfortable sharing about activity that might not be legal, while also providing, their name and their contact information. So if you're trying to reach, people living with HIV or people who use substances, very specific demographics of people, as well as just people who live in large cities. It's going to be more expensive than an ad for a very broad audience, like anybody 18 and up living anywhere in the United States. So, depending on your study audience, consider a multi-prong approach. Meta, Jacked, and influencers. Think about the cost of platforms beyond Meta, which again is Facebook and Instagram. Trends evolve. By the time your study is enrolling, there could be a brand new platform that is all the rage that you want to be on. So when you're building your budget, make sure you look at restrictions around advertising certain topics on the platforms you're selecting. Many don't allow, like I mentioned, research advertising to people under 18. Some have language restrictions around certain topics like substance use that can make it difficult to keep an ad going without it getting rejected by the platform. So it's just very important to consider those limitations in the budget phase, as well as when developing the ads language. And this stage of the process is an ideal time to consult with our team at IDHI. So we can provide insights about the cost and success of studies we've run for similar populations, including information we might have on cost per eligible contact and cost per enrolled. So I'll share a couple examples of budgets. Say you have a small project enrolling maybe 50 people in Florida. It's a pretty broad audience. Anyone over 18 might qualify, and participation only involves an online survey. There are no study visits, no follow-ups. It's fairly inexpensive to advertise for a study like that. Something like $50 a day with just one ad set. And I'll talk more about ad sets in a moment. That could get you about 300 to 400 eligible contacts per month. But it is worth noting, eligible contacts don't necessarily equal enrolled participants. That rate is always much lower. So another example, say you have a large project enrolling a few hundred people in 4 cities. It's a pretty narrow audience, say just ages 18 to 24. Let's say it's young men living with HIV. And the study is more intense than an online survey. It involves in-person study visits. So even though we're spending a lot more in this example, there's less of a return because of those factors. So in this situation, we set up 4 ad sets on Meta, one for each city. That lets us tailor the ads to those locations, whether that's just including a partner logo on the ad in that location, or by eventually tweaking the budget to lean into what's performing well, or to balance out geographic locations of participants. If say, most of the enrolled participants have come from New York City and you want more variety, you'd be able to drop the New York City budget and increase the others. So you'll also see the funds are not split equally across the platforms. Why less on Snapchat? That's because its interest-based targeting is pretty broad. It's large categories like genres of music, whereas Meta has more granular options like specific artists. So it can be hard to reach a really narrow audience effectively on Snapchat, and I just tend to spend a little bit less there in this type of situation. And you'll see Jacked, which is a dating app, is very pricey, and it's set up differently than Meta and Snapchat. So like I mentioned earlier, these ads are not self-service. Their team runs your content for you in what they call 3-day ad flights. These ads have much shorter character limits than other platforms, and some other differences. So unless you have a huge budget, you're probably not going to run jacked ads in every location all of the time. So in this example, I chose, 1 city per month to run a couple of ad flights. So that is a super quick look at budgets. I'm always happy to chat more about your specific project. These are just a couple peeks at the thought process, but really the options of how to structure your campaign are endless, and it can be a bit of an art or trial and error. Okay, so your ads are running. What's next? It is time to keep an eye on the metrics so that you can continue to update your strategy as needed. What are we looking for? Each platform offers a lot of options for metrics. The ones on this slide are the ones that I look at the most. So impressions are the total number of times that your ad is displayed. That can be multiple times per user. Reach is the number of unique users who see your ad. Frequency is the average number of times a user has seen your ad. Cost per click is the average amount the advertiser spends for each ad click, and click-through rate measures how many people who see an ad click on it. So you can use these metrics to determine which ad imagery or language is performing the best, when it's time to refresh your content, whether a certain ad placement performs better than another, budget adjustments to focus more on a platform or an ad set that performs best, all sorts of strategizing that extends far beyond the time we have today. But in general, I recommend running a campaign for at least 2 weeks before deciding the platform isn't fruitful. Meta has a learning phase that lasts about a week, and sometimes it can be a little slow to gain traction, or sometimes other minor tweaks to add targeting are just needed along the way. The most important takeaway here is that a good social media campaign is an ongoing effort. It does not stop once the campaign launches. All right, let's shift to talk about fraud. Fraud is a significant concern in all research and raises particular challenges in the context of virtual trials, especially for studies that are fully remote and have limited real-time interaction, whether face-to-face or remote. So our guiding principle for addressing fraud is to protect the integrity of the research and data while also preserving accessibility of participation and building and maintaining trust with prospective and enrolled participants. Finding this balance is a process and should be tailored to the needs of each research study and community. Fraud can come in multiple sources, including people acting directly and the use of bots and increasingly sophisticated AI tools. This is an area of the field where continuous work is needed to keep up with rapidly evolving technologies. There are many ways that fraud can occur, with some of the most common being misrepresenting someone's identity or study eligibility, trying to quote unquote game the data system by completing screeners repeatedly or enrolling multiple times under different fake identities, providing fake or inaccurate data, for example, fake test results, invalid contact information, or skipping through surveys. Many of these types of fraud can be picked up and prevented before they cause damage within your study using a multi-layer approach that picks up on these kinds of red flags using a combination of intentional system design and technology-based tools. So if you only take 2 key points away from these slides on fraud, they should be that fraud will be attempted, but there are steps that we can take to prevent and mitigate fraud and its impacts across all stages of a virtual trial. So this begins during development, creating study protocols that anticipate and account for fraud monitoring. We recommend investing early in automated fraud filters that will help particularly with early screening and bot detection. This will help reduce the burden on staff and increase your ability to weed out more false entries. At the recruitment stage, we've learned through experience to minimize or avoid static screener links that allow fraudulent users to reuse compromised links and to flag high-risk ads proactively. So for example, ads that will be placed on platforms where we anticipate high traffic or have had previous bot attacks. We build in protocols for requesting additional information and validation checks when any red flags have been triggered. As prospective participants move from screening to enrollment, you should have a clearly specified multi-step process for fraud detection that includes a mix of automated and human review and data validation. And fraud detection should not stop after enrollment. Think of this as a continual, ongoing process throughout the life of a study. After enrollment, you can control how incentives are distributed in staged or delayed payments to give additional opportunities to identify anomalies. We also monitor study data for anomalies in data completeness, inconsistency, or unanticipated patterns of drop-off or missingness. So, while social media recruitment is an incredibly fruitful strategy, it's not without its challenges. Make sure you're using a multi-pronged fraud detection strategy with ongoing monitoring. Beyond fraud, you may still reach unintended audiences through social media campaigns or draw unwanted attention to your study because of the topic of focus. We encourage you to work closely with your community advisors and stakeholder populations on solutions to adapt and pivot strategy. Like if you run into this issue, you could pivot to a more tailored outreach through closed online groups rather than a broad paid campaign. Social media recruitment and virtual trials can also exacerbate digital divide inequities. So consider including in-person recruitment by partnering with local sites that can serve as hubs for people who may have limited access to Wi-Fi. And often, budgets can be challenging as social media advertising options evolve. Plan for trial and error, consult with experts for support to set you up for success, and consider recruitment sprints that have some downtime between them so that you can refine and optimize the strategy based on the sprint's performance. And with that, I will hand it back over to Kate to talk about engagement.
Now that we've had that great overview on recruitment from Judah, let's move on to talking about engagement. So you have done all this incredible work and probably spent a fair amount of money in finding those eligible participants, and now you need to keep them. And before you even get them enrolled into your study, there's still a number of different places where they can fall off along the way. And drop-off is normal, but it is important to understand why and where drop-off is happening and what you can do to adapt your processes along the way and keep as many of those folks as possible, converting them into enrolled and active participants. So the image on this screen is an example of a retention or screening and recruitment funnel from one of our actual projects, where we were seeing a big loss in terms of starting with our eligibility numbers into consent and then all the way down to becoming active participants. So we did analyze this data in the midst of collecting it and noticed that where that big drop-off is between the eligibility and the consent process. We reviewed our consent process and found that it was really overly burdensome and long. And so did an improvement to that, simplifying and shortening the consent process, and then ended up seeing a 17% increase in improvement in retention at that stage. You may also be important to look at differential drop-off by different demographic characteristics or your different recruitment sources. We've done all these kinds of analyses on different studies, and you will see differences in who stays and who goes. And this is something you may need to take into account even at the recruitment stage, as well as potentially at the randomization scheme or during your analysis. And without scaring you off too much from virtual trials, I will say that it may take you hundreds to thousands of dollars and screeners to recruit and get down to that 200-person sample size that you actually need to enroll. So again, once you have found and enrolled those very valuable participants, you want to do everything you possibly can ethically to retain them and engage them in your trial throughout the life of your trial. This is a protection on your investment, and it's also going to help you obtain the highest quality data and ensure that your participants, if it's an interventional study, are exposed in the optimal way to the intervention that you've designed. You're really building a relationship between you and your participants, or your study and your participants. And at a higher level, you can think of it as building a relationship between the participant or the individual citizen and the research process. So trust and respectful communications and interactions are important at every stage of this relationship building process, and really making sure that you're conveying clear expectations for what the participant can expect and what you expect of them and what they can expect of you, as well as clear directions for anything that's happening within the research. And this is particularly important for virtual trials where they're having less of that in-person and maybe less of that real-time interaction with another person. Also want to make sure that they're comfortable with everything that's happening in the trial, and that is something that extends beyond just the consent process. And really at the end of the day that they're enjoying it and getting something positive out of this research experience. Otherwise, they won't stay, they won't be retained, and they certainly won't do another study. Even when we have incentives, financial or otherwise, to participation in trials, if the participant is not having a good experience, they're not going to stay. So let's talk about each of these different strategies in a little bit more depth. With participant communication, you want to be in contact with your participants early and regularly, and you want to find that sweet spot in terms of finding the right level of communication burden on your participants. Remember, they're being bombarded with digital communications in every aspect of their life, most likely. And so your text message, your email is just one message among a wide range of material that's coming at them, and easy to get lost in that, and also easy to be deleted if what you're doing is too burdensome or too annoying or not, just simply not interesting. So thinking about different ways of maintaining human touch, even within digital environments. We like to use a multi-channel approach where we're making use of text messages, emails, phone calls, different web portals. You want to tailor the frequency and the timing and the mode of the communication to both your participants' preferences as well as what they're sort of most accustomed to and expecting to receive from you in terms of both what that information or communication is and what you're asking of them in return. Making sure it's easy for them to respond if that's what you're asking them to do, and creating that really seamless communication experience wherever you can. You will need to have protocols for troubleshooting communications and crisis support, and this might be crisis on the side of the participant. For example, participant who may be in distress or have a medical issue arise, whether in relation to your research or potentially indirectly related. And this can also be crisis elements on the researcher side of things, which might include things like breaches of data security and privacy. One thing that can be helpful is to build a framework for your engagement and retention, where you're thinking about the different aspects of the communications and the activities that you'll be employing to retain your participants. So you might think of different behavioral hooks, which could include things in the gamification sphere like streaks and milestones and rewards and leaderboards. You can think about social hooks, which could include creating or building on existing peer groups, thinking about different bidirectional communication, things like accountability, building virtual communities within your research. And then you can think about supportive hooks, and these might be things like emotional check-ins that are coming from the researchers to the participants, or something that you might be facilitating among your participants, as well as adaptive nudges that help support behavior and behavior change in closer real time than a traditional intervention might be able to support. There are a number of different options you'll have in thinking about how to tailor these retention tactics. For example, when you're thinking about reminders, you may have an opt-in or opt-out schedule. Give participants the choice of how they'd like to receive reminders, and they can be adjustable over time as you learn about your participants and you learn about the research trial and how it's going. When we're thinking about rewards and gamification, these can be digital and they can also be in real life. So for example, you could have digital badges, you could have a virtual store, you could also have prize drawings or a physical store, and points that participants earn could go towards redeeming these different prizes, or as they hit different milestones, could have rewards at each of those within your trial. When we're thinking about the check-ins, again, this is building that relationship with your participants. So checking in on their emotional well-being and having the opportunity to ask, how participants are doing, not just what they're doing within your trial. Participants will pick up on these efforts, and this will help, again, in solidifying their commitment and ongoing participation in your research. And we would encourage you not to underestimate the effectiveness and the importance of little things. So even just small personalizations, like programming in messages that will use your participant's name, Things like having that firework or that confetti blast to celebrate a streak. If you think about your own use of digital tools and the type of reward structures that are built in there and how that makes you feel, these apply within the research context as well. Also, you want to reduce friction at every possible place. So things like making sure that if a participant gets interrupted or kicked out of, for example, one of your follow-up surveys, that they're able to resume that task where they left off and not have to start over. Considering whether adding an offline mode for your digital tools, if that's possible, is something that you might want to do. This can help if participants, particularly for participants who may have limited or inconsistent access to a wireless network or internet. And thinking about the timing and the tone and the triggers within your interventions or clinical trials. So using supportive and empathetic language, keeping things short and sweet and action focused, using that personalization features, offering the opt-outs, ensuring that you have a good hook. Again, think about the type of digital media that you consume and what kinds of hooks will grab your attention, and build that into your research trials and communications. You want to avoid and stay away from fear-based or judgment-based language, not sending long or complicated messages or overwhelming participants with the frequency of your communications or forcing notifications and not giving them that opt-out option. In thinking about the tone of your communications within your trial or intervention, you may want to choose something that is appropriately matched either to that interaction or overall. So thinking about, is it the language of a coach that you need or a clinician? Are there aspects or areas where the language is more coming from a friend type persona or a peer? Here I'll just add a side note about Mozio, which is one of the options for participant communications. Mozio can now be integrated within FSU's REDCap, which allows you to do pre-programming and setting, for example, pre-timed reminders. Mozio is a two-way SMS service, and you can use it. You can include links to surveys within it, appointment, medication reminders. You can also pipe information into those messages that it has been collected in other aspects of your REDCap project. So for example, with that name personalization, that's something that you could do using Mozio. It has a high level of data security and privacy as it's been built particularly for the research context. And it also gives you an easily trackable record of the communications that are happening with participants, which is stored securely within the platform. So you don't need to worry about having to go back and see, what those communications were on a study phone, or have those kinds of risks of, where that data is living. There are some considerations to keep in mind. There can be, depending on your budget, there may be a cost burden. Currently, I believe FSU's plan is the basic plan, which allows up to 10 projects and is somewhere around the $1,000 a year for that license. That does have a limited cap on the number of messages, but you can add money to increase that number. The other limitation is that currently this service is just for the US and Canada, so if you're doing global work, this is not a good option. There would be a separate service you would need for internationally. And then the tech support is provided by Mozio, not through FSU or REDCap, so there may be some inconsistency there in terms of responsiveness. So coming back to our retention funnel, you can see and think about how each stage of that funnel process, depending on who and how you're losing people, will require tailored strategies for increasing retention of getting from one step to another. That may be simplifying your consent. That may be adding a human touch or adding more personalization, adding tiered incentives or other engagement strategies along the way. And a lot of it is really trial and error. So you want to build in the ability to monitor and track how those retention strategies that you try, how they have an impact on retention as you go forward. So we don't have time today to go into each of these in a lot of detail, but I did want to leave with just some thoughts and some brainstorms around future directions for virtual trials. These are things that we've been exploring and experimenting with in our own research, and hopefully will spark some ideas for you in your research. So thinking about how you might use AI for recruitment and retention responsibly within your research, thinking about predictive targeting or use of chatbots. Digital biomarkers, so the expansion of wearable devices and the amount of data and monitoring that is coming in from all of these devices could really be put to use in your research, and think about how you might use that data in looking at relationships with your health outcomes of interest. Thinking about hybrid models and what's the best mix of in-person and virtual interaction and data capture for your particular population and research questions. There's a lot of evolution within the regulatory setting, so the FDA guidance and monitoring on decentralized trials is expanding. And then thinking about how your work might expand and have broader global reach through digital trials that can cross borders, and how you might navigate the ethics and privacy laws in those different settings. I'll also just put a pitch in for reaching out to us at the Institute on Digital Health and Innovation. We do support individuals and research teams with consultations. You just go to this link here and you can enter some information about what you might want to talk about, and we'll set up a meeting. We go through all different kinds of requests, so study development, IRB, and regulatory. We can partner with you on a longer term project if you need longer term support, or just set up a one-time meeting to talk through different fraud prevention strategies, or answer questions, or help in conceptualizing different components for a grant application. So do reach out to us. We are always excited about building new partnerships and making new connections, and would love to hear from you. We do also periodically offer more intensive training seminars and workshops. So in the past year, we had one 3-day workshop in October 2025. We have another workshop in June of 2026, and we'll continue to offer a variety of these in the future. So if you're listening to this before the end of June in 2026, you could consider registering for this time around, or keep an eye out on our webpage. You can register for our newsletter and learn about future opportunities. And as we wrap up today, I'll just acknowledge again the Clinical and Translational Sciences Award. If you would like to learn more about the Translational Workforce Development Group, you can check us out through this QR code or link here, and we would love to hear from you as well. So again, thank you for joining us for this presentation today, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.